Hi everyone, I'm Bijan from PM Exercises, and today I'm with Felix Watson, one of the PMs at Microsoft. I'm very excited about our interview today. We're going to talk a little bit about how to prep for your PM interview at companies like Microsoft, but what we're going to do today also is we're going to spend a lot of time to chat about what you do as a PM when you land a PM job, because sometimes it's a bit of a frustrating experience. And what's really interesting to me is Felix has actually been focused on helping product managers really learn how to better onboard themselves in a new PM job. And he's got really interesting blog posts and LinkedIn posts, and his LinkedIn profile page is really interesting content for you guys to follow. I highly recommend you guys to follow Felix and get to know him. But with that said, let's just get started. Felix, maybe you can introduce yourself to our community before I ask you some questions.
Absolutely, Bijan, and thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. You got a wonderful PM community here, so I'm honored to be with you here. So again, I'm Felix, product manager at Microsoft for about 2.5 years. My background is in computer engineering, so I spent 5 years as a developer before I discovered that I was really more excited about what customers were doing with our technology as opposed to, in addition to actually building the technology and solving their problems. So this is when I discovered product management. I actually went to get an MBA to round out my business skill set and background. And that MBA is actually what helped launch me into a PM career at Microsoft. So where everyone is in the community, probably prepping for interviews, refining their resume, things like that. I've been there. And so, yeah, I'm just happy to be here and happy to be helping PMs now level up. So that's kind of what I do. I run a PM mastermind group on LinkedIn, as well as do clubhouse events. And we really just talk about what are the challenges you face as a product manager and how can you get help from other people doing the job?
That's really interesting. Thanks for the background. And it's actually a very interesting topic because sometimes we're like so focused about getting a PM job that we almost forget the second part of the challenge, which is what you do once you come on board as a PM. And it, I think, causes a couple issues. One is that sometimes people are afraid of applying for jobs because they think that, hey, I don't know what to do as a PM. And every PM job is so different that I don't think anybody really knows what to do before they actually start the job, right?
Yeah.
And then the second part is you also potentially have like this anxiety of like, even after you land the job, like, what do I do now? Like, how do I get on board it? So I'm curious to know from your perspective, um, what can you do to do well when you come onboarded as a PM?
Absolutely. I think the number one thing to do as a new PM is to talk to the team, get to know your team, and talk to customers, right? That's the biggest thing. As a product manager, you don't have to be the expert on the technology. You have a fantastic engineering team that can do that. You don't have to like design the best solutions. You have a design team that can help you with that user experience, but they're looking to you to be an expert on what the customer problem is, what the problem space is, and what problems customers have. So you get a lot of context by talking to your team, and you get a lot of insight by talking directly to customers, whether that's through interviews, sitting on calls with other teammates or the sales team. But whatever you can do to talk to customers, that is like the key thing you want to do when you first onboard on a team. And I actually had a goal, right? When I first jumped on my team, one of my managers told me, it's really important in your first 3 months to land some key wins, right? And so this is
Mhm.
the classic thinking about, your first 30, 60, and 90 days, what do you do? And my advice to people is really threefold. It starts with like what I said. One, talk to your team, figure out why what you work on matters to the business. Build that business context, right? Ask your team, what do I need to know about this job? What does the team do well? What is the team struggling with? Things like that. You hear from everyone, as many people as you can. I mean, set a goal, 10 people a week or something like that, right? How many people can you meet on the team? Next, learn from customers. Like, what is their biggest challenge? Ask them questions like, if you had a magic wand, what would you change about our product, or what would you fix, or what problem would you
Mhm.
solve for yourself if you had a magic wand? You really get insight into what their biggest challenges are by asking these types of questions. And your goal, your outcome here is try to draft some sort of vision document, right? What's the vision for this space? What problems do we solve? And then third, define success, right? PMs need to understand, how do we win as a team? So work really hard in the beginning, the first 30, 60, 90 days to develop a perspective, a viewpoint on what does success look like. One of the things I did in my first 30 days was I drafted our first metrics dashboard for our team. And it was horrible. I mean, it's gone through so many iterations since then. But the fact that I took a dedicated approach to take a first pass at it in my first 30 days meant that I was able to continually iterate on it. And now that dashboard, looking at our metrics week to week, month to month, helps drive a lot of the initiatives that we work on in our planning. So again, talk to teammates and partners, talk to your customers, develop a vision for what success is and how you define it. What are the metrics you track? And I can talk more about each one of those, but yeah, I mean, that's kind of at a high level what I recommend.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think the interview prep, the interview process for a PM job is also kind of structured in a way that tries to see whether or not you're the kind of person that maybe takes that approach. Like
Yep.
when you're asked, like, how would you improve a product or how would you design a product? Like if you don't start from the user or the customer, chances are you're going to end up designing a product that is not really solving a real problem.
Absolutely.
So I think that's a really interesting advice. I remember when I was coming on board as at one of my PM jobs, the challenge for me was like the organization was a little bit big and there was a bit of a distance between kind of what I saw and what the consumers really wanted. So I had to kind of like have a bit of an uphill battle to really get my ways to the end user and to the customer to really speak to them. I'm curious to know if you think that that would be a kind of a challenge that people will face in like larger organizations, or typically at companies like Microsoft, there is a way for you to directly connect with the, whether it's an enterprise client or end user, if you're interested in kind of an ad hoc
Absolutely.
basis or quick way.
So two things. One, absolutely, it is a big challenge. And two, the way you go about solving that challenge sometimes involves being scrappy and sometimes involves just really being insistent that you find out how do people really talk to end customers. I'll tell you a story. My first job as a PM, I call it like my first failure story actually, is I was brought in to build analytics for recruiters. And when I first got introduced to this problem space I was going to own, I essentially heard from my team, hey, our product doesn't have analytics for recruiters. All of our competing products do. The sales team isn't closing deals because our product is missing analytics. So can you build our first analytics feature? And we need to do it in 6 weeks. The type of person I am, that type of deadline, that type of high stakes, like first pass at an analytics feature, I was excited. I was pumped. I'm like, okay, let's solve this problem. Let's go build analytics for recruiters. Well, fast forward to the end, we launched the product. A few customers loved it, but I noticed only about 10% of our customer base was adopting the feature. And as I talked to some of our marquee customers, they loved the feature, but they said, one thing we could have used was maybe just like a simple table. Like your dashboard is beautiful. It integrates with Power BI. Has a really great design. It works really well. It pulls in a lot of data, but we have weekly triage meetings on our recruiting process. And we just need a table to know like who's in what stage in the pipeline. And immediately I knew as a product manager, I failed, right? We built this great product. The sales team did close more deals, right? Our product kind of doubled revenue for the year, but I didn't solve a customer problem. Sales teams not closing deals is a sales team's problem. It's not a customer problem. And so as I think about how I approached it, I did a couple things right. I was pretty scrappy. I was in a business school program. I had contact with a lot of recruiters in my past. So I reached out to some. I reached out on LinkedIn, cold emails, whatever. Hey, I'm building a recruiting dashboard. How can I learn from you what you need in a recruiting dashboard? And that was great. But I didn't actually talk to our existing customers or even the recruiters that I spoke to about, hey, what are your biggest problems with analytics, with the data? How do you use the data? What are the scenarios, right? And so I think not only getting access to customers and being scrappy, but being really thoughtful about the questions you ask. If I come to a customer and I say, hey, do you need analytics? They're going to say, yeah, we love analytics. Analytics is a great buzzword. We want analytics. But if I go to that customer and I say, hey, what are some of the ways you use your data today? What are some of the challenges that you have with the way you use that data? I might have heard things other than analytics. I might have heard, well, we have a weekly meeting where we review our candidates in a pipeline. Sometimes we have to pull together a lot of numbers. I have challenges because I download all this data out of a platform. I put it in a spreadsheet. And that would have told my PM mind, oh, wait a minute. They're taking minutes, hours of their day to download data, export it into a spreadsheet, format it, right? That would have been a completely different solution than the dashboard that I built, right? So that was kind of a long story, but just to tell you, like, it's so incredibly important that you talk to your customers about the challenges they face. You're a problem owner as a product manager. You're not a solutions owner, right? I operated like a solutions owner. How do we get analytics in the product? Integrating Power BI, that's a solution. That's not a problem. It's not a customer problem, right? And so it's really, you face this at big companies all the time. There's great technology all around you. People want to find ways to use that technology, but you have to go back to the basics, right? What is the problem we're trying to solve?
That's really interesting. It actually reminds me of a really interesting story I heard when I was studying my MBA. And the story was that Samsung was trying to figure out how do they make the best remote for their TV. Like they're like, we want to have the best remote in the market because we think that people really care about remotes.
Yeah.
So they did a lot of market research, and some people said we need more buttons. Some people they said we need less buttons. Some people said we need this functionality. But what Samsung did was they decided that they're going to observe how people actually interact with the remote. And they find out that one of the biggest challenges was they were losing the remote somewhere in the home. Like they were putting it under the couch or like somewhere under the table they couldn't find. And it was never brought up during the user interviews, because nobody would want to say that, sorry, I'm like kind of losing my remote at my house all the time.
Yep.
But it was a pain point. So they came up with this new feature where you could basically kind of, create a buzz on your like remote by pressing a button on the TV, and you'd immediately find out where your remote is.
Yep.
And that was a good feature, and the customers loved it.
Yep.
So it's really interesting how like you're highlighting that when you focus on the user and you focus on the problem as a PM, things kind of work themselves out. And when you're coming on board, the first thing you need to do is really understand the problem statement. And then like you have the time to figure out the solution with the rest of the team, or like really understand why the current solution is not working and all that. So
absolutely,
that's really interesting.
Man, I need to get that remote. That sounds awesome. I'm always losing my remote.
Yeah. It's definitely interesting. Kind of resonated with me because I think we make that mistake a lot as a PM. What are some of the, like, in your opinion, like common mistakes that people make, aside from not focusing on the consumer or the end user side that you've seen people make, like when they come on board? Because there's like just like this kind of information overload, I feel like. And you're wondering, where do I start? I think we all face a bit of that challenge, like as a PM. We'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I can speak from my perspective specifically as a previous engineer. I think as an engineer, especially, I gravitate towards the technology. So when I get on board, of course, I'm learning a new tech stack, a completely new product. And I think PMs that I've heard, and myself included, worry so much about really understanding the architecture. What type of problems are in our APIs? What does the code do? Where's the messy code? Where's the clean code? How do we reuse code? Really trying to dive deep into the technology of their team. And as an engineer, like I said, this was me. I was diving into by integrating Power BI and all the tech stuff. But as a PM, you really need to understand, again, the problem space. But you also need to understand, what matters to the business, right? What matters to the business? So you really need to be thinking about the strategy. How does your product fit in there? What's most important about it? What are the metrics, as I said earlier? So I think diving too deep into the tech early on and not really getting a sense of the business, the customer, the problems, that is a big challenge. Now, what I find is the easiest way to remedy this is to, instead of spending as much time focused on the underlying tech, just use the product. Just use the product, right? You can't talk to customers, use your own product. Pretend you're the user. Think about some of the things your product promises to solve for the user and just try to do it. How easy is it? How difficult is it? Where do you find moments in the product where it's way more difficult than you might expect? Bring that up with your team. Talk to them about it. Hey, did you notice it's a little bit difficult to do this thing? Why is that? Is there a way we can improve it? So I find, spend a little bit of time each day just using your own product. You'd be amazed. I mean, myself included, how much sometimes you just like don't use your own product. You're so deep into the like, we're trying to build this new feature, we're trying to solve this new problem, we're trying to meet this new deadline. Um, but if you just use the product, you'll run into things that are odd that probably should be fixed. And sometimes you can't fix everything, and so you don't want to do that as a PM either. You have to prioritize. That's a key thing, right? As a PM, you may see a lot of things that are broken and you want to fix them all right away. But you have to come to the engineering team with a prioritized list of like, these are the things that are most important to solve and why. But again, that's my best advice. A little less time worrying about, do I understand the tech exactly? And more time just using the product, putting yourself in the shoes of the user.
Got it. And I think that this notion of like knowing your product really well is something that sometimes we take too much time to get to, and before that we start solutioning, which is really dangerous.
Yeah.
So that's really good point that you bring up. I think one of the interview questions that people ask a lot during the job interview process is like, what's your favorite product and how would you improve it?
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like the interview candidate's answer to that question usually gives me a really good idea of how they're also going to approach solving, basically making a product better that they know really well,
Absolutely.
like, especially if that product is something that they're managing. And like, in order for you to improve something, you have to either love it because you know it really well, or you have to be paid for basically knowing about it.
Yeah.
And in this case, you're being paid, and hopefully you also love it, because then passion is really going to help you kind of go an extra mile. So I definitely agree with that. Thank you for that information. And one final question I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on is like, how would you say people, and this is really more about your experience as a product manager at Microsoft,
Yeah.
how do you think people should prepare for their PM interviews at Microsoft and other tech companies similar to Microsoft? Like, what's the best way to prep for it to be able to pass the interview process?
Absolutely. So the absolute best way is to practice, right? The absolute best way is to practice with PMs who've been there, with people who are at that company, if possible, or people who are familiar with that company, if possible. And so at Microsoft specifically, you'll definitely get the behavioral type questions. You'll definitely get the product design type questions. And so you want to practice those things, right? You don't want to go into the interview thinking, oh, I can just like put together some stories for my behavioral on the fly, or, oh, I can just talk about products all day on the fly, because that's exactly what you'll do is you'll walk in kind of solutioning in a sense and not really have a good structure. So for product design type questions, practice, right? Think about some of your products and don't just dive into like, what features would you change? Really think about, hey, what is the business trying to accomplish here? What is the user problem? What are some different user personas? How would I prioritize them? What are the pain points for the particular persona I've decided to focus on? How would I prioritize those? Then think about, okay, what would solve this particular pain point and meet the business objective that we talked about in the beginning, right? And you really want to have that structured approach. When you're thinking about behavioral questions, it's very similar, right? You think about, hey, what was the problem I was trying to solve, or what is the problem posed in the question? What were some of the things I had to think about? How did I move forward? And then what was the outcome, or how did I learn from it? You really want to have that structure and you want to practice, I think. So it's great that, PM exercise is a place where you can get questions, you can mock with people, watch videos of other people mocking. I think these things are very valuable to really understand how that structure works, that flow. And when you get to the interview, you don't want it to be top of mind. You want it to be, hey, I've practiced this structure quite a bit. So that would be my advice.
Got it. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. This was, I think, really an insightful interview. And I appreciate you spending the time to share your experience with the PM community at PM Exercises. And for those of you that are watching, please feel free to visit PM Exercises at productmanagementexercises.com. Visit Felix LinkedIn page. It's a really interesting page that has really interesting content. I will share the link to his LinkedIn profile on this at the bottom of this video, so people that are interested can actually go in and follow him. And anything else? Maybe we can wrap it up.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just say, like Bijan said, you'll see information on where to find me on PM Exercises. You'll find my LinkedIn. On LinkedIn, I have a LinkedIn group called the PM Mastermind. Let's help each other level up. And so it's a place where people can just pose their questions. So I encourage you, join us on LinkedIn. If you have any PM questions, feel free to toss them out to the group. I also am on Clubhouse every Thursday, 9 p.m. Eastern. With the same kind of topic of PMs helping each other level up. So yeah, find me there and look forward to seeing people on PM Exercises. Thanks again, Bijan.
Thanks a lot. Have a good day. Bye.
Bye.